Hello everybody, how's it going today? Glowplasma231 here, back in today to talk about the 240th chapter of the World Trigger manga. This chapter is titled The Away Mission Test Part 36. And I make this joke every time, but we have 36 parts of this away mission test now. Ashihara, please name your chapter something else at some point, but it is what it is. This is a pretty big chapter of World Trigger this month. It is a total of 35 pages, and this is just our one singular chapter for March, so it does seem like we are getting longer chapters for a trade-off instead of getting two shorter chapters, so that is very nice to see. I mean, World Trigger has been a monthly series now for a good long while, so getting these 35-page chapters does make a lot of sense for the, well, monthly manga format, right? I mean, that's how most monthlies do it, unless you're a really, really weird monthly and you don't, so, yeah. But with that, I feel like this is a very good chapter. This chapter, as we'll get into it, really focuses a lot on all of the various, battle sims that are going on here, right? Last chapter was very much full of a bunch of characters talking like, oh, hey, here's how our units can fly, and here's how all this economy stuff works, right? But this chapter is a lot different than that, because here we actually get to see the action happen, and all of the payoff for all of these characters that have been talking for literally like 2 chapters straight about all of these various battle sims and all of the things that are going on with them and their Tryon Soldier creation, of course. So this chapter is a lot better than last chapter. I'm just going to go and say that now because last chapter, rereading it, is very, very tough to get through because it's literally just so many characters going, oh, so if my unit flies, then it flies, and because it flies, it does this and this and this. And that's honestly not the most interesting at a certain point. And like I said a minute ago, this chapter really focuses on Wakamura's squad's whole idea of, hey, this is how they're perceiving all of these battles going on. So because of that, we did get a lot last chapter about what Wakamura's squad strategy is going to be going into these battle sims. Pretty much to sum it all up real quick, they're going to be using Husei's idea of pretty much making a bomber to bomb all of the other surrounding areas, pretty much with the sole idea of, hey, this is a strategy that'll work today because there won't be any counterattacks against it, and then going forward, we can change up our strategy because at that point, everybody will know about this bomber trick, pretty much. So they're thinking it for the future and what people won't be prepared for today, so a very interesting way to sit down and look at it, right? And then the end of last chapter was just, I think it was Miwa and Yoneya pretty much just sitting there talking like, hey, Wakamura squad has a good strategy going on, but who do you think will win today? And Miwa said something like, oh, I think Suicide Squad 7 will be the best out of everybody else, pretty much with a focus on Osamu, because yeah, that's where our main character, that's the squad Osamu's on, is Suicide Squad 7. They're pretty much our main POV besides for Wakamura squad through this entire thing. So yeah, that's what happened last time, and really I don't see any reason why we need to delay this video any longer, so let's just hop into World Trigger chapter number 240. Again, this chapter is titled The Away Mission Test Part 36. So we actually open up this squad in a hallway of the border HQ, as we see a few members of Kako Squad all walking through and talking with each other, as we see, of course, our favorite frog girl, or she's not my favorite. I assume she's somebody's favorite, and that's why I said that. I personally don't like this character. I think she's weird, but of course this is my Kitagawa, and the other characters we see here are Futaba Kuroe, and then the operator of the squad, and Kobayakawa. So pretty much what just goes on here is Mai just pretty much flops onto the ground, as we pretty much see that her stomach is rumbling a little bit. An is just like, oh, Mai, what's going on? Are you hungry or something, right? And Mai's like, yes, I am hungry, right? And Futaba's like, did you not just eat? Like, what just happened with you, right? As we just see, what's her name, Mai, just continues to lay on the ground as the R2 just sort of starts to surround her a little bit. And, An brings up to, hey, these three's next judging shift is about to begin for, of course, the away mission tests. So they're like, hey, can you hold out till dinner to, like, eat something? And she's just like, no, I need a snack. So Futaba's like, all right, well, can I go out and run and grab one or something? And as all of that's happening, we suddenly have a new character appear. I think we've seen this character sort of in the distance, but we never actually gotten them introduced before because, I mean, we sort of get him introduced on this page. And we see that this is Hayato Uno, who is an A ranker from Kusakabe Squad number 4, and he is the role of a sniper. He pretty much walks up, and we see that he's got some food with him, so he shares that with Mai, and Mai just suddenly stands straight up, and then pretty much the 3 members of Kako Squad get to moving on to their judging ceremony or whatever they need to do, and they pretty much just thank Uno for what he did, and that's really all of Uno's involvement in this. He does not say a single word, he just appears, gives food to Mai, and then just walks away. Like, it's honestly a little bit of a weird setup here, right? As we then cut over to 2 members of Kusakabe Squad who are sitting in a different room, of course, not Kako Squad, but Kusakabe Squad. I know, it's very easily to get mistaken, right? But I know you guys are true World Trigger fans. You would never be confused by this like I am, and I guess I'm a fake fan of World Trigger then. But we do see that Ryuji Sayaki and Saki Kusakabe are indeed sitting here. I do always find it interesting that Kusakabe Squad commander is their operator. Like, it's just a little bit of an interesting note there. But we pretty much, like I said, we see Saki and Ryuji talking to each other. And pretty much you're just going back and forth. And, what's his name? I just read off his name, I forgot it. Ryuji's pretty much talking. He's just like, alright. Well, earlier, I mean, we were talking to Arashiyama, and Arashiyama said, like, hey, we should pay attention to Wakamura Squad because they're going to be doing some interesting stuff. But then Yoneya and Miwa told us to keep an eye on Suwa Squad, and he's like, I don't know what to watch here. Like, who are we supposed to be paying attention to? Like, these people are just opposites. Why can nobody get along? But we also see that the operator, of course, Saki, or Kusakabe herself, she's just like, hey, why don't I monitor Suwa Squad 7, and you can watch Squad 11, or Wakamura, right? And Ryuji doesn't really seem the fanciest idea, but he's just like, hey, if that's how it's going to be, I guess I'm sticking cheering for all of Rokuro's people, right? Of course, Rokuro, Wakamura, so yada, yada, yada. And then pretty much Saki's just like, hey, we're going to be cheering for them. We're not going to be, I'm sorry, she says, we're not cheering for them, we are judging them, right? Like, this is our job during all of this. As after that, this little brief page banter between the 2 members of the Kusakabe Squad, we then finally cut over to the actual battle sim rooms themselves, or the sealed environment lab rooms, whatever they're called, right? As we finally get some sight on Wakamura Squad 11. Is like I said, we are pretty much going to be following these guys for the rest of the chapter with, I think, very minimal suggestions, right? So pretty much as we are just sitting here, I'm also opening up my World Trigger Volume 24 to get the character page, because I cannot tell you how useful this stupid little page is, right? But we pretty much see that we're sitting here. Wakamura pretty much breathes in a nice big breath and it just blows out for it's like, all right, team, are we all ready to go? And everybody's just like, yeah, sure, let's go. As we see that it is 3 p.m. when the special battle or the special battle simulation exercise, number 1, of course, begins. And we pretty much sort of follow this from the thing of Wakamura, as he's just thinking like, hey, here's our total squad loadout. He's like, hey, we have Husei's aerial units, as he's like, hey, they're all mid-sized with a decent defense and armor, and it rains grenades over enemy territory. As we get the text of what a grenade does, it's just a high-impact, low-range explosive. When used with flying units, grenades are unaffected by the aerial range adjustment penalty, which is pretty much that whole thing is, I think it was, the farther you have to aim, the more action tokens you have to put into it, or it was something like that. As we're going to see throughout the rest of this chapter, for all of the various Triumph soldiers, what we're going to get is the crater name, which of course for this thing is Huse, right? And then we get the name that they actually gave them, and the cost of the total unit. As we see that, of course, the creator of this one is Husei. He has called it the Bomber Canadian, which I get that he's supposed to come off Canadian, but I don't think he had to name the thing Canadian, but whatever, it is just a little bit of a funny thing. As I've said multiple times before, the whole Husei Canadian joke is honestly just hilarious whenever Ashihara does it correctly. I mean, it is just peak comedy, right? But we see that the total cost of this thing is 2,214 Tryon units. I guess your Tryon units, 2,214. I guess that's just it, right? So we see that's Huse's unit, and then a Wakamura just like thinks to himself like, hey, and all of the other units are just small ones with mediocre abilities. They're spec'd less towards durability and more towards evasive action, of course, since they don't want Huse's unit blowing up all of their various units. As we see the Wakamura's thing, he called it the Gunner X4 with a cost of just under 900. Sasumori's he called the Spike Rat. They're deployed. My bad. Pretty much what it is. Wakamura is the Gunner A, and he deployed 4 of those units. And then Sasumori has the Spike Rat with a cost just under 6,000. He deployed 4 of those units. Hanazaki made the Sand Spud, which I'm going to sort of point off this design of this thing. It is pretty much just like a rad with a massive shotgun out of the back of it, or like a big shotgun sniper rifle, just like a big gun just out of the back of a rad. It's a little bit funny looking. And then we see that Hosai's was called the Radar Corgi with a cost just under 200. So, and there's only 3 of those on the battlefield while there's 4 of the rest. So we pretty much see what their strategy is. Like, hey, Husei's going to drop bombs. All of the other units are just going to go around and evade most of the time, but they can also attack if needed. So, yeah, makes a lot of sense. As we pretty much see Wakamura to say, all right, in match 1, we are facing Kuruma's Squad 5. As we pretty much hop right into battle sim, as we see that Husei is dropping bombs from his Canadian bomber. They're hitting all the ground, and we see that they score some decent points for him. As we see that he destroys one of Kuruma's units, which is pretty what Kuruma called the long shooter, which is pretty much just a dog that fires bullets out of its mouth. And we see that they scored the points for it, with the cost being just above 1,000 on this one, right? And pretty much there's a little bit of a note here in the manga itself saying that the unit details are only visible to the reader itself, that all of the various, all of the our squad members and people playing this battle sim can't actually see the units, because that was the big thing last chapter, is the whole idea of like, hey, let's make decoy units so a very strong unit is actually very weak and a very weak looking unit is very strong. That would totally nip that strategy in the butt. So it is just a little bit of an interesting note here, like, hey, this is what's going on here, alright? We then see Hikari's creation, which he called the Crack Shot. Pretty much it looks like a rabbit with a gun on the side of it. It goes to shoot Husei's bomber, but Husei's bomber does indeed have shields that block out this. As we, in the actual squad room itself, we see that, what's his face? I just knew it, the Hanazaki. Hanazaki's sitting there and he's like, hey, I only spot 2 actual snipers on their side, but I bet all those dogs had some range attack with all of their skills. And Hughes is just like, hey, their strength in numbers pose no real threat to us at this point. As Wakamura's just like, hey, good job, Hughes. He's rolling all of the range attacks, so we'll hit them hard from the west, right? As Wakamura just continues to think like, hey, our opponent's formation is pretty balanced from what we can tell, and Husei is flying units that can bait out all of the long-range attackers, while we amass troops on the other side to give us a big numbers advantage. But he's like, but then, however, as we see Yuba's creation, of course, since he's also in Kuruma's Squad 5, and we see that his creation he called the Stealth Slug with a cost of an even 1,200, which makes a little bit of sense, because I'm guessing that Yuba's creation cost was 1,200, so he got literally everything he could get out of that unit in his Stealth Slug here, which is a pretty cool name, but it does just look like a regular rabbit sort of design, right? As we see that Yuba's Stealth Slug, of course, has the Optic Stealth skill, which pretty much renders the user untargetable by enemy auto attacks for 1 turn. Using a weapon removes the effect, right? As his unit suddenly goes invisible and then goes over to one of whose were those guys? One of Hanazaki's Sand Spuds, and slices it in half, getting the points for Hanazaki's thing, since it is now dead, right? And Sasumori's just like, oh crap, that one suddenly snuck up behind us, and Hanazaki's like, yeah, it must have a lot of action tokens used if it was able to get up that fast to us, right? But Wakamura's like, hey, forget about all of that. The score still says that we're winning, so let's just focus on the enemies in front of us. as we just see that Husei's bomber strategy continues to work, taking out all of Kuruma Squad's various units, until eventually Wakamura just continues with narration, just saying, hey, we kept wearing away at each other until the match ended in a draw. As, of course, the conditions for a draw are if it's within 2,000 points, then it is an even draw. And if it is above 2,000 anyway, then whoever was above actually wins. As we see, the Wakamura squad ended off with more points than Kuruma squad with 6,753, while Kuruma squad only had 6,417. So about a 300 point difference, but still ends up in a draw, even though it was in Wakamura squad's favor, right? And Wakamura is sort of just saying this is like, oh damn, he's just like, I should have prioritized being the attacker units who got the drop on us first. Pretty much being very harsh on himself after seeing this, after he's just like, hey, we had a chance, we could have won, but I sort of squandered it all up. But pretty much Yusei's just like, hey, Wakamura, don't get too much into your own head. He's like, hey, even if the enemy have a few surprises up their sleeves, our team won't be beaten by any run-of-the-mill balanced formation. As pretty much Wakamura is just like, well, it seems like Husei actually was proven right. And it says, in match 2 we faced their squad 6, and we won with a 3,000 point spread. As we see that Wakamura squad, we even just skipped a battle, which is just really nice to see. We don't need to focus on it, so we don't need to focus on it. As we see, the Wakamura squad had 7,746 points, while Kudera squad only had 4,700, right? So, again, that over 3,000, so they ended up winning that match, right? At this point, Hanazaki speaks up, and he's just like, hey, we're barely actually broke... At this point, Hanazaki actually speaks up next. He's just like, hey, we barely broke a sweat bringing home that win. He's like, against Kodera, like, they were, like, swinging yesterday, but he's just like, I guess we're just getting really good at this, right? As Sasumori's just like, hey, it looks like the bombing strategy really messed up all of their teamwork. And Hanazaki's just like, yeah, their formation was definitely built around combos. As we see just a little visual here of a bunch of units all right next to each other, and then just one of Husei's bombs just dropping on them and exploding everything. Just a little bit of a fun note here. One of their units, again, it looks like a rabbit pretty much, just is like, oh, tally-ho! It's just a little bit of a funny thing as he's holding out his arm out. It's just a little bit of an interesting, funny panel to me. Husei then just says, like, hey, their approach took into account the matches up through yesterday. Like Mizukami and Suo squads, they focused on combo strategies. But he's like, too bad for them. Today's the one day when diligence and accuracy aren't the keys to victory. And he's like, hey, rather matches will be won by the element of surprise and creative thinking. As we see that Sasumori is just like, oh, creative thinking, huh? Which, sure, dude, I think you should have put that together by now, but I've never seen Sasumori be like, oh yeah, he is definitely one of the smartest guys around here for sure. But then we just get more Wakamura narration just saying like, hey, and then came match 3 against Ninomiya's squad 8. And here on pages 12 and 13, we have something that we have not seen in World Trigger in a very long time. As we see, it's not a full 2-page spread, but it is a pseudo 2-page spread. As we see, the top half of these two panels are just a big 2-page spread overlooking a massive cityscape. As we see a bunch of rabbits on top of roof buildings, but then in the background, we see these massive Trion structures sprouting up along the horizon. It is an insane page turn. I mean, as you can probably tell, I'm recording this video here about 2 months late than when originally these chapters came out. But I remember my first time sitting down and reading this and doing the page turn, not expecting this insane sight, because it gives the level of like, yeah, you can tell these things are Trion soldiers, and they're just there sprouting out of nowhere. It's on a massive, colossal scale. It just looks crazy and stupid cool. I mean, the designs of these things are also awesome. 2 of them sort of look like a plant in a way, as one sort of looks like a tree with like a very, very thick trunk, and then like some greenery up top. Or I would guess it'd be greenery, but I'm guessing it is more of that like grayish white of a Trion soldier itself. And then one sort of just like reminds me of like a cabbage or like a Brussels sprout, as we see it's like a bunch of small balls inside the inside of it, and like leaves or like a shell like covering around some of them. And then the last one sort of just looks like a DNA like helix dome or something. Just very cool and very interesting designs. As we do this page turn, we see Wakamura Squad reacting to all of this. As we see, of course, the operator Hisoi looking, she's just like, oh man, check those out. I mean, whatever they are. And she's like, those things are super freaky, right? And I love Wakamura's note here, just like, oh yeah, they are definitely visually unique, because for sure, like, this is where Ashihara, like, gets off on, like, drawing his insanely good sci-fi things. Like, I just cannot praise this page turn enough. It is just awesome, right? But then Sasumori starts to think about it, and he's just like, hey, well, wouldn't those be, like, high-power units made with, Amatori's Tryon, possibly, right? And, what's his face? Hanazaki's just like, hey, well, I mean, there is a chance, because, like, if all three of those are major players, then they could end up eating out a huge chunk of the overall budget, right? As we just get the idea of, like, hey, if each of those three structures each total up to about 3,000 points, that is pretty much 3/4 of their total overall budget, which would only leave them 3,000 for other units, right? And then it's always just like, hey, but the radar is showing 12 total units on their side, which means there's about 9 other ones, depending on the ones that may be also stealthed, right? So pretty much Sasumori's just like, yeah, so it probably is unlikely that the big ones came at a very, very high cost, right? But Wakamura's just like, hey, we always can't be sure of anything. The other 9 could be all low-cost grunts or something, or maybe 1 or 2 of them is a powerhouse. It's really impossible to say at this point, right? But pretty much it's like, hey, either way, we've got our strategy with Hughes's Canadian bomber. We will just go ahead and get this done, right? And pretty much that's what we see next, is we see Hughes's bomber going over to town, as we pretty much see he's approaching one of these massive structures, pretty much the one that sort of looks like a tree, as pretty much all of a sudden we see that all of the various Ninomiya Squad Tryon soldiers that aren't the big guys, the other 9, are all closely approaching on all of Wakamura Squad's units, as we pretty much, like we see at Sasumori yells out, oh man, they're on the move, right? And Wakamura's like, alright, head on then we'll hit them with all of our auto attacks. We see all the various Tryon soldiers going around, as we see that one of Ninomiya's, or not, one of just the general units is using the boost strike skill, which pretty much says that it provides a momentary mobility boost, equipable on only 2-legged and 4-legged beast units. As we pretty much see that this Tryon soldier comes by, a boost pass, and cuts off the head of one of Wakamura's units. At least I think it was the Wakamura unit. Yeah, it was Wakamura's Gunner A unit. I feel like I'm going to be going back to that page a lot, because I'm going to forget what they called all of these guys, right? But we pretty much see that the same thing happens again, as the same unit then just turns around and slices off the head of one of Wakamura's other gunner units. We then see that the Husei bomber, the Canadian bomber, drops one of the bombs on top of the big tree-looking thing, as we see that it had a bunch of large armor equipped, and all of it just cracked. And the big Tryon soldier unit was only worth 266 points, right? It was a massive decoy to begin with. As Husei's just like, oh, I guess that behemoth wasn't worth much at all, right? As we see that the creator of that was actually Ren Kagami, who called it her Tornado Tower. Of course, she is the operator for the squad. So, yeah, pretty much makes sense. The operator made the more cheaply costed unit, so perfect sense, right? But then Wakamura's just like, alright, then that tells us that other unit must have been Amatori's. As we see that, we get all the details on Amatori's unit, of course, creator Chika Amatori. The name of this unit is Yuma, and then the cost is 3,176. There's just a lot to unpack with that brief bit of information. First off, I want to talk about the cost, right? The entire time we've seen a lot of people guessing in these past 2 chapters that, like, alright, probably the biggest max is going to be about 3,000, but seeing that Chika has units over 3,000, that's just a little bit of an interesting thing to see cost-wise, which means that this one unit is probably the ace, and they can't really have more than about 2 of them out if really eating into the entire squad's budget, because 1 unit for 3,000, I mean, that is a massive amount of, like, if that unit dies, then their squad is pretty screwed. But then, of course, the name, calling it Yuma, that's just so nice and cute, pretty much being like, yeah, it seems to be built around, like, Yuma's skill set, like that fast-moving, that sort of grasshopper jumping with the scorpion going by, cutting off somebody's head. It is a movement that we saw that the Yuma unit did. It seems like something that Yuma would have done in the rank wars, and something that we have definitely seen Yuma done before, so that's just really cool to look at, and just the name of the Yuma, I just do really, really love that, so it's just really awesome, right? Well, at this point, we pretty much just see Sasumori here, and he's just like, oh man, well, I guess that's another one with mobility out of the roof. Hanazaki's like, yeah, and probably a busted attack stat too, just to cut through everything. But Hosoi's then just like, hey, strong or not, all of its weapons paint it as an attacker, which means that Hyusei's flyers will be out of range for it, right? So if we can go down and take it out, then that would be advantageous for us, as they're pretty much just talking like, hey, does anybody remember Amatori's Tryon stat from the regular battle sims? And Hyusei remembers it, and he says that it was 25, and we pretty much see Wakamura doing a little bit of math, saying like, hey, I guess that would make her cost limit somewhere around 3,000, as we pretty much see that his unit, he has 6 Tryon, and he's got access to it just over 1,000. Hyusei has 18 and has 25,000, so having that total of 25, I would sit down here and try to do some math on it, but I don't feel like it currently. So she would have somewhere between 3,000 to 3,500, and of course we know that her unit costed just under 3,200. So if I had to guess, her cost is probably around that 3,200 range, but it also could definitely be higher. Pretty much all of this goes to say, just like, hey, meaning that we won't lose as long as we beat all the others, even setting Chika's unit aside. And he's just like, yeah, pretty much. Wakamura then says that he'll force all of his units, or he'll use all of his units to force Amatori to use up all of her units' actions, and for then Hyusei to come over and take down all of the other units, right? As we see the bomber flying over, and it goes down. He drops the bomb on some of Ninomiya Squad's 8 units, as we see that all of these units pretty much look the same, but just with Amatori's super strong one mixed in there. And we see that a grand majority of these guys are costing 11,030 points, as we see that Hyusei's Canadian bomber gets 2 of those. We see that one of the units continues to take out a few of Wakamura's Gunner A units, as pretty much at the end of the day, we just get more narration from Wakamura saying like, hey, ultimately, both sides got massacred except for their respective aces, and in the end, it was a hard-fought draw for us, as we see that Wakamura Squad had about 7,850 points, while Ninomiya Squad had about 8,800. So definitely still within that 1,000-point window, so it is still considered a draw, but even though Ninomiya Squad did have the advantage going into it, right? Hanazaki is just like, oh, well, that was a pretty close call there, and he's just like, man, if every one of those jumbo monsters was a massive decoy, like, that's just crazy. They would be willing to implement a strategy like that, right? And we see that Sophomore is like, how did he even come up with all those complex designs? Like, it's just, like, very interesting, right? And Hughes is just like, hey, every time I brought down one of those big behemoths, numerous layers of additional armor were destroyed, and pretty much he just says like, hey, much like a unit's base armor, that additional armor can be modeled however the creator sees fit, right? So even if it doesn't look like extra armor, it is still extra armor. As we sort of just see a little bit of an image here with like a rad equipped with armor level D, how you can put it, and then you can also put on large heavy armor, and you can sort of equip it however you want to do it, right? As pretty much we just see that Hanazaki's like, yeah, that's just a lot of labor for all the visuals. But then he just thinks about it, and he's just like, but come to think of it, those things did remind me of Kagami's little clay figures. As we see that Rin Kagami's hobby is sculpting colored clay. So for all of the favorite Rin Kagami fans out there, there's a little bit of information for you. I don't know why you needed it, but we do have it now. But it does make a lot of sense that she'd have that design sense to make these big, weird-looking behemoths with all of the design, if she has experience designing sort of clay already. So the same skill set sort of works together there. Soe then speaks up, just saying like, hey, we knew they couldn't take down all of Hyusei's units, so Amatori's rampage didn't really feel like too much of a threat there. Pretty much just saying like, hey, that's another major advantage of using flying units, at least today. As Wakamura is just thinking through all this, like, hey, I think we're starting to really get a feel for this. Like, our formation is doing good. We have the key to victory. As we pretty much now just blaze through a lot of the various matches. As we go through match 4, they were up against Kakizaki. I don't know why I couldn't say that word. Kakizaki Squad 3. They won by over 3,000 points. Yeah, just simple as that. And then in the next match, match 5, they faced off against OG Squad 2 with a narrow victory just over a 2,000 point spread. As we see that Wakamura had 6,100 and OG Squad had 4,070 points. So a very narrow spread there, but they narrowly brought it out, right? As we see that Wakamura is very like ecstatic about all of this. Like, all right, that's good. 2 big wins in a row. Like, that definitely will help us out in all of this. As we see Soe just thinking like, hey, she's like, I was all nerves wondering what crazy critter Eco might cook up. She's like, I guess I was worried for nothing. As we see the upgrade design of who's his face's Ikoma's unit. As of course last time we remember it was the pile of poop, but we see that Ikoma has changed a little bit, and pretty much he took the point of the poop and cut it into 5 indistinct sections and made him out to make it look like a flower instead. As we see it, the crater is Ikoma, calling it the Wildflower in Bloom, with a cost of 216. Very, very funny how Ikoma changed it up. Like, the whole joke last chapter of, like, I don't think I got the memo of what we were supposed to do here, and then seeing what he changed it to, it is definitely very, very funny. Just, like, I don't even think he changed the design of the pile of poop. He just made little just slits in it, so very, very funny to look at. Sasumori is speaking up again with Hanazaki, and Sasumori's like, yeah, our strategy really works against all these very balanced teams. As Hanazaki's just like, yeah, not even a single loss so far, and he's like, that's so nuts thinking about us. As we, if you don't remember from the 5 matches we've seen in this chapter, they have 3 wins, 0 losses, and 2 draws, which is the best that Wakamura Squad has ever done in one of these things, right? As we see that who's his face, Hanazaki's just like, I wonder if Hyusei's flying units could have done all of this job on their own. As we pretty much have Hyusei say like, hey, I honestly don't know. As he just talks about more of the economy of flying units. As he's just like, flying units suffer heavily penalty to their action tokens. So the enemy elects to flee without a fight. I would have to a hard time actually catching them. As we see, just for being a flying unit, if you don't remember, there is a 5 action token. You have 5 less action tokens that you can possibly use, and then a penalty due to the armor size that Hyusei picked out for the Canadian bomber, right? Pretty much saying that while there's a possibility of 20 total action tokens, his max is only at 14 because he cannot use 6 of them. He continues just saying like, hey, say we send forth an army of arrow units, opponents who lack a counter strategy will simply choose to run hoping for a draw, and if they don't have massive movement with their action tokens, then they'll succeed in that, right? And then he says if all of our matches were in draws, we ought to have saved ourselves some trouble and utilized Yoshito's guaranteed draw strategy from the start. So not even try to play a draw, but continue and make it so it happens, right? He then continues to say like, hey, then we could have ignored all of these matches and just spent time on the special assignments instead of actually trying and losing simply to a bad matchup in the end, right? Soe then says like, yeah, if we come off too strong in the beginning, then nobody will be willing to give us honest chance for a fight tomorrow. So we got to fine-tune our squad and seem beatable with some effort, right? Pretty much, Sasumori's is like, yeah, we don't want others using the guaranteed draw strategy on us because that just wouldn't work at all. And Hanazaki's like, yeah, we're in trouble if they throw in a towel, pretty much, right? We then see the beginning of match 6 versus Kitazoe Squad 4. We see that they're pretty much in a stalemate going towards turn 2, as we see the entirety of Kitazoe Squad is almost nothing but snipers, right? And we see that Hanazaki's like, this is the one team that we thought nobody would actually use. As Hanazaki's just like, I mean, this is the worst formation that could go against us. Like, this is our worst possible matchup. But who's his face? Wakamura just says like, hey, trying to bomb them from above seems like definitely a losing prospect. As Hisoi's just like, yeah, you and Sasumori should go get your guys and try to sneak up on them and take a few of them down, so maybe we can get in a bit closer with the Canadian bomber. But Wakamura's just like, yeah, that sounds good. So pretty much he says like, all right, Hanazaki, you advance on the snipers and keep them in check. And it's like, I'll use my units to guard yours. As they start to move, and then Wakamura goes over and gives the what's it called? The commandments. I was going to say no. He pretty much gives the marching orders. That's the word I was looking for. He gives those to Sasumori, just telling him like, hey, use all of the buildings to hide from their line of fire, and then just try to get in close as you can, right? And pretty much he says like, hey, we cut into the enemy territory on the very next turn. We pretty much see all of this start to happen, a bunch of shields being popped up from all of these respective units, as we see that the entire sniper army is just firing on all of the various units. Turn 3, we see that Wakamura is saying like, hey, once we're all across the street, we'll split up and pick out all of our various targets. Then whenever we thinned out all of the snipers' yumbers, we'll be ready to bomb on them the next turn. Pretty much they all just start moving. A bunch of things go on. We see that one of the Kitazoe Squad units comes down and blows up one of Wakamura's units, and one of, I think that's Sasumori's unit. I'm going back to that front page. It was Sasumori's unit, the Spike Rat's what he called it again. So we pretty much just see that happen. A few of those get blown up, right? As suddenly Hiso's, or no, what's his name? Ah, God. World Trigger's characters, am I right? Sasumori's just like, oh man, all of these explosive attacks, like we didn't expect that. As we then see all of the units also run down, as we see that some of them are foe snipers. As they run down and they are just attackers, and they take out 2 more of Sasumori's Spike Rats, pretty much, right? The entire team is just freaking out, and they're just like, so these things are sniping, blasting, and smashing? Like, what all can all of these guys do? As Wakamura finally puts 2 and 2 together, and he's like, alright, some of these sniper rifles are just fake, right? It's just armor sculpted to look like a rifle. Like, why didn't we figure this out earlier, right? As Hanazaki's just like, it makes sense. So even if they all look alike on the outside, all of their guts are totally internally different. As we pretty much get a lineup here looking at like, all right, here are 4 units that look exactly the same, but one is an attacker, one's a sniper, one's a blaster, and one is a shooter, right? And we see Asoi's just like, God, that's a real pain in the ass, right? She's like I can't believe all of this. But she's like, hey, shoot, I'll have to fix all the various tags I label them with. But she's like, but I didn't keep perfect track of them, which ones are which. Like, obviously, getting the issue of, like, all of this, because this is probably what Kitazoe actually wanted, right? As I remember, everybody's just, like, definitely freaking out. Sasumori's just like, yeah, we definitely got countered hard and clean. As we see on this third round, we see the Wakamura squad has 0 point, but Kitazoe squad has just under 3,000 points. So unless Hyusei gets in there with his bomber, they are going to be losing this battle for sure. But Wakamura pretty much just like cuts out this doubt, just saying like, hey, it's not over yet. We still have 2 whole turns left. And he's like, their entire strategy is countering enemy units lured in by their fake snipers, right? And he's like, hey, and now that we know the trick that they're trying to pull, we're just facing a plain old balanced team. And he's like, hey, we've got less to work with now, but we can claw back the advantage with all of our various bombers. As he's like, as bad as things look, we can still aim for a draw. As we see the Canadian bomber fly overhead of some of these units, as we see it just drops down and it murders a few of the various units here. As we see that these are units that Somei created, simply called a dummy unit with a cost of just under 200, right? And Hughes even realizes this, like, I guess these are just decoy units, like, not much going on here. And so it's just like, I guess they're just radar on legs, because if I'm not mistaken, Some is the operator. Yeah, Hanasome. She's normally the Kitazoe, or not Kitazoe, Kako Squad operator. We just see some more stuff going on as we see that one of what's his name, Wakamura's Gunner A units goes through and blows up one of their other units that isn't a decoy, worth just under 1,200 points. As we pretty much see from just these two small attacks here, they're already up to 1,700 points. So slowly but surely, they're building their points back up. And Wakamura's like, nice, their gap is definitely shrinking. That's really awesome. As all of a sudden, Hanazaki's just like, as he's like, oh, guys, I'm sorry. He's like, all my dudes just ran out of ammo that fast, right? And Hosoi's just like, oh, wait, are you serious? As Hyusei's just like, hey, that's not an issue. We can still pull this off. As we now cut to the very end of the match, as we see it, they barely managed a draw with just over a 1,900 point spread. So just a few points off, as we see that they got 3,700 points and Kitazoe got 5,000 or 5,600 points. So just they narrowly won out there, and that's even what Wakamura's narration says, like, hey, a draw by the skin of our teeth. As we see all the teams just like talking like, man, that was really hard, yada yada yada. And eventually Wakamura's just like, man, I'm actually feeling good about this. We can come out on top today. Because of course, with these 6 matches that they've played, they've had 3 wins and 3 draws and no losses at all. As we end the chapter, we just get to know of match 7 is versus Suwa Squad 7. Hey, look, there's 2 7s there, but the sort of big idea here is like, all right, the entire time we've been hearing, like, at the beginning of the chapter, we heard all stuff about, like, Miwa Squad say, or, like, Miwa and Yoniya saying, like, hey, check out Suwa Squad 7, they're going to be doing big things today, while Arashiyama saying, hey, take a look at Wakamura, they're going to be doing big things. So this is sort of going to be, like, the first big battle that we are going to be seeing here with the, matches with the these exercised battle sims here. So I think this is a very, very good chapter for a multitude of reasons. Like I said, we actually get some of the actual battles going on. We go through 6 whole battles in this chapter, which is just awesome to see. And while only 2 of those battles don't have screen time, the rest of them have a decent amount of screen time. And even if it isn't like a full brunt thing of like, hey, here's everything going on here, I do really like it because we do see the small complications, and that is all we see. We don't get really any fluff in it, and just as much fluff has been in this away mission test arc, it is very, very nice to see. Another one of those things is just like the sense of scale that you get from the Ninomiya Squad fight, as even though that they clawed out a draw with Ninomiya Squad, just seeing their colossal towers above the sky, I mean, it just looks so stupidly cool. And even knowing that they aren't some big things or just something that Kagami made with her clay sculpting abilities, it is just so cool to see. Of course, with that also, Amatori's Yuma unit, just, it's so cute and nice. And then at the end of the day, just seeing all of these various battles, seeing Wakamura Squad actually succeed, like, for the longest time, Wakamura Squad has been the butt of all of these jokes here in the away mission test. They're always coming up at the end, they're never getting far, but here, we see that Wakamura Squad has a chance. They're looking good. And of course we know that Hyusei is going to be going on the away mission test no matter what, because, well, he's from After Crater, or After Krator, but we don't know that any of these other guys want to go, and honestly, I don't really think that we need Hanazaki or Sasamura going on the away mission test. But it would honestly be really cool to possibly see Wakamura, an underdog, going along with him, and to do that, he needs to do good in this test. If not, as they said earlier, Wakamura could be a massive unit in Border's future success. So just all of those things compound on top of each other, seeing Wakamura Squad win, actively seeing a lot of these battles go through and at a decent and fast pace, and then just seeing the cool sense of scale and the sci-fi elements that Ashihara is great at. Those 3 things make this chapter very, very good in my opinion, and a lot better than last chapter when they're simply just talking about flight economics. So yeah, that's really all I gotta say about this chapter. I just feel like if I keep talking, I'm just gonna be rambling some more. which I probably don't need to be doing. So thank you guys so very much for watching this video. As you probably know, and if you don't know, I do plenty of other World Trigger chapter reviews on the channel. I will have a playlist in the description down below of all the other chapter reviews that I've done. So if you did enjoy this video, hope you wouldn't mind subscribing to the channel, liking the video, and leaving a comment down below on what you thought about this chapter. If you thought that sense of scale is awesome, and if you like Wakamura Squad actively winning these battles. But also, go check out all of those videos down there. Just a little bit really does indeed help me out. And with that, I really don't have too much else to say. Like I said, I'm filming this late, and there is no chapter that will be coming out in April of 2024, but there will be chapters in May of 2024. So yeah, I'll see you guys next time for World Trigger chapter number 241 review. Again, today I did World Trigger chapter number 240, titled The Away Mission Test Part 36. An awesome chapter that I hope we keep up this hype level next time. And yeah, this will be Glowplasma 231 signing out.